What is up, everyone? Welcome to Matt is Reading. Today I have an exciting video. I'm going to be going through all the books that I had read that I want to talk about in 2024. I'm going to tier list rank them. You can probably tell my voice is a little bit gone, but if I waited any longer to make this video, we're going to be doing my 2025 tier list at the same time as 2024. So I'm excited to get into it today. What I'm going to try to do as I'm going through this tier list is I've got 15 books that I read last year. And one thing that I'm going to try to do is try to make it as even as possible. So I've got S, A, B, C, and F, 5 different tiers, 15 books. I'm going to try to throw 3 in each category. So obviously, this doesn't mean that what is considered an F tier for the year doesn't mean that I think it's an F tier book. It's just of the books that I read that year, this is my favorite book to my least favorite book. And once I start making these in the future for next year as well, maybe I'll be able to get into a little bit of comparison year over year. But let's go ahead and get started. First one I've got is Before They Are Hanged. Actually, I'm looking at this. I might move some of these around. Yes, so let's get started. Obviously, I'm looking at my list here. I have some of these that are out of order in the series, and I think that I'm okay with that. I'm just going to roll with it. So the first one we've got is Carl's Doomsday Scenario. This was book 2 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, which I have been loving. I actually recently just finished the 3rd book and started the 4th one. And I've been loving this series. It's probably the most fun that I've had reading a series in general. It's very video gamey. They call it lit RPG, so it kind of reads like it's a little bit of a video game, which I didn't think that I would be that interested in, and I don't think it's necessarily a genre that I am interested in. But as I'm going through this, I'm hooked. I'm hooked on the world. It's post-apocalyptic. It gives me Hunger Game vibes, but also in the coolest video game ever. And the characters are fantastic. But both the characters that are the main characters, the villains in the series, everybody is good. I've been loving this series. So I'm going to have to give myself some wiggle room as I'm going around here. But I think I'm going to start with throwing this one. I'm going to start with A. It's an A tier book. I might even bump it up in S tier because I've been having so much fun with this series. Next one we got is Dune. This was a reread for me. And if you've been a follower of this channel, my first video that I did, I talked about how Dune, I saw the movie several years ago, went and read the book, and it got me back into reading. I used to be a reader, kind of fell off the wagon with it a little bit, read Dune, and it got me back into it. Dune is one of my favorites. I love this book. It's fantastic. If you've only seen the movies, haven't picked up the book, you got to read Dune, and then you also have to read Dune Messiah. The first 2, I think, are kind of a part A and part B of the same story. Phenomenal books. Love Dune. I'm going to toss it in S tier for now. Dungeon Crawler Carl, we got book 1 of the series up next. Same thing. I think what I loved about book 1 is that it gets you into the world, and then book 2, it just picks right up where that world left. There's different floors that you visit. There's a total of 18 of them. Not going to give any spoilers. You find that out pretty quickly. There's 18 of these different floors. The world gets set very quickly, and then each book that I've read since then, it just picks up right where the last one left off. They almost read like a continuous story. So I'm actually going to throw this one. I'm going to throw that one in. I'm going to throw that in S tier, and we'll see that one where that one ends up. I think Brandon Sanderson had his year of Sanderson maybe in 2022, where he did the Kickstarter, raised like $57 million. This year was my year of Sanderson. There was a lot of Sanderson books that I read this year. I've been reading through the Cosmere. I have a coworker who shared a reading checklist in order that you should go through, and I've kind of been following that and filling in the gaps of where I maybe went too far ahead too quickly. But Edgedancer, this was one that I had read. I went back and read after finishing, what was it? The Way of Kings, I think this was right after, or maybe The Words of Radiance. Anyway, it follows a character named Lift. She's a Knights Radiant, and it's just basically one of the interludes within the Stormlight Archives. It's just a longer version of one of those stories. The interlude itself is the prologue to the book. It's about a half-hour read of the prologue to the book, and then the rest of the book was just a couple hours. Good book. I love this character that's in this book, one of my favorites in the Stormlight Archive. But this was also a great year of reading, so I don't know if I could throw it in A. I'm going to stick it in B for now, and we'll come back to it. This next book, Foster by Claire Keegan, I watched a YouTube video where somebody was talking about the best short reads that you can read, and it's about 90 pages. I listened to it during a car ride. It took about an hour and a half to listen to. It was cute. I liked it. It was fun. Is it something I would tell people, you got to read it, it's the greatest story ever? No. But if you don't want to listen to a podcast and you're like, I want to add one more book to the books that I've read this year, this would be a good book to do it with. But I know I've got to put one in every category and 3 in every category, so I'm going to toss it down here. It wasn't bad. I don't think it was a typical F by any means, but just in the year that I was reading, it probably wasn't one of my favorite books. I'm switching up these next 3 because I'm just going to talk about the whole series. Joe Abercrombie, The Blade Itself, First Law, Before They Are Hanged, Last Argument of Kings. Phenomenal series. This world is so dark. People would say that it's a dark series, and I didn't know how much I was going to really like that. I haven't read anything that's that dark before. His name on social media, Joe Abercrombie, calls himself Lord Grimdark or Grimdark Lord or something. He seems like a funny guy, and his books that comes through, no matter how dark the books would get, there was moments that you would find yourself laughing during it. There was a lot of really dark moments that were just made funny by some of the great characters that are in it. Some of the best characters in any book that I've read. The first book, The Blade Itself, very character heavy. I like it though. I like whenever there's really good characters that really make you think about, maybe not necessarily people you know, but people that you know could exist. Whenever characters are done really well, it's a dramatic version of somebody that you're like, I knew somebody like this a while ago, or I know somebody like this now. He has some of the best character writing of anybody that I've read so far. So I'm going to have to put one of these books in S tier, I think, because it's one of my favorite trilogies that I've read, and I think I'm going to start with The Blade Itself, even though the other 2 are also so good. More plot driven and Before They Are Hanged in The Last Argument of Kings, which had a great ending to the series, and I've heard that the second trilogy that came out is actually better than the first, so it's on my TBR. Definitely want to read it. I haven't gotten to it yet though. I'm going to throw Before They Are Hanged in, I'll throw it in A. I'll just throw them right down in a row here. That looks fun to do. So it's right down in a row. And again, I wish I could put all 3 of these in S tier. They were phenomenal reads this year. Back to Sanderland, the Sanderland. We have The Hero of Ages, which was the final book in Mistborn. Man, I want to put it up here so bad. I love this series. It was so good, and I actually read the first book at the back end of 2023. First 2 books that I read in 2024 were The Hero of Ages, or The Well of Ascension and The Hero of Ages, and I loved it. It kicked off to a great year of reading. Hero of Ages, Sazed is, and I've told this to people before, I think Sazed is my favorite character in any book that I've read. There's a lot of good ones in Mistborn Era 1, but Sazed, he's just so interesting to follow the whole way through, and I love how things end up for him. It's pretty astonishing. Again, no spoilers, but he's just really cool character. I really liked him the whole way through. I'm going to keep it in S, and we'll have to figure it out at the end, I guess, what we're going to put these. Splendid in the Vial by Eric Larson. Actually, last year, I went and saw Eric Larson speak before it was right after his latest book came out, which I have on the shelf here. Demon of Unrest, which is on my 2025 TBR. Really good, and it was fun meeting the guy. Actually, in the book, he signed it. I don't know if you can see it, but it says "For Matt is reading." Anyway, pretty cool. I don't think he's subscribed, but you can. Well, we have The Splendid in the Vial, and fantastic. One thing that I got out of this book, it talks a lot about the bombings that happened during World War II. One of the things that it was talking about the most was the idea that throughout all of history and warfare, wars were fought on the battlefields, and then if you won on the battlefield, then you would be able to come into the city. And we kind of take it for granted now whenever airplanes can bomb remote civilian structures or strategic military structures well over the battlefield lines. This was the first time that was really happening in all of human history. London was being bombed. There was places in Germany being bombed. And the idea that as a civilian, there was airplanes that were carrying bombs above your head. Like, this has never happened before in all of human history. So it was a very interesting read. I really liked it. It was also towards the end, it was taking some plots that I didn't really care about. Talked a lot about Winston Churchill's daughter and her husband, and their marriage and everything. And again, like, interesting, but it wasn't where I wanted to see the book go. I've heard there are other books by Eric Larson that are fantastic, and I'm looking forward to reading those. Again, not a bad book. I'm going to toss it down in C for now, just in terms of all the books I read this year. The Wager. This was very cool. It was a book about a mutiny that happened in the 1700s, and I thought it was cool how the author was able to pull all of this together when you didn't have people that you could interview. It was based all off of journal entries that they had found, and he was able to pull newspaper clippings from England at the time, and essentially they were trying to piece together the story of one man's word versus another group of men's word of who was responsible for the mutiny and what ultimately happened. It was very fascinating, had a really good twist at the end, ended up being kind of slow right at the very end, but really cool, very fascinating, interesting story. If I had read this in another year and I hadn't gotten in on a fantasy kick, I think I would have had both of these two higher, but I just read a lot of really good fantasy. Well of Ascension, talked about it. I love this book. The ending of this book, I was shaking reading it. It was the first time I think that I had really experienced the Sander Lanch that happens at the end of a book. So good. Love this book. Really good character development in terms of what was built off of the first one, The Final Empire. It was very, very good. It led to what I thought was an even better Hero of Ages ending, but love this one as well. Warbreaker, very fun read. It was a nice Sanderson standalone in a world where I read through Mistborn, I read through Stormlight Archives. I was reading through all these series. As you can see, I've got Dungeon Crawler Carl on here. I have Last Argument Keys. I was reading a lot of series this year, and it was a good standalone. This next year, I plan on reading a couple more standalones, or mixing up the reads and not just blowing through an entire series straight away, so I don't get bogged down by it. I had a lot of fun reading this one, and there's also a lot of overlap in the Cosmere that happens in this book, and that you get to see of characters that happen in some of the books I've already read and that I continue to read in 2025. So I like this, but I'm going to keep it here for now. Stormlight Archive. Here we go. Last two. The Way of Kings and The Words of Radiance. Sanderson describes this as his epic. He wants to be remembered as like, this was the big series he put together. He talks about how there's going to be 10 books that come out in it. He just came out with book 5 recently. I have read The Way of Kings. I've read The Words of Radiance. I finished in 2025 during January. I finished Oathbringer. Great series. They can be slow though, and I can see why. When people were asking me, should I read Brandon Sanderson, I was like, yes, but start with Mistborn, because if you go into Stormlight Archives, there's going to be times where you get bogged down, and if you haven't experienced the ending of one of Sanderson's books before, you're not going to feel like you have anything to be excited about in the way that you do when you go back and read Stormlight Archives after you read something like Mistborn, because the ending of these books feel like it is, I've said this before, it feels like it's like the end of the best Marvel movie you've ever seen, where there's just people fighting and things happening so quick and all these plots just coming together that you thought were meaningless throughout the book, and they just all come together. It's fantastic. So if I had to rate both of these, Words of Radiance is probably one of my favorite Sanderson books so far that I've read. So I've got to put that one up here, and I might even have to kick out The Hero of Ages, even though it was fantastic. And The Way of Kings, again, great book, but like if you started with The Way of Kings, it would be a lot. So I would start with some of these other Sanderson books that I put up higher. Now, I had said going into the video that I was going to have all of these evenly, and I feel like I should do that still. So I'm going to toss Edgedancer down here. And again, not because it was a bad book, but as something that was just giving you more details from one of the interludes within Words of Radiance, I feel like I'm just going to put it down here for now. Love the story, though, and it makes me sad to put it there. Maybe next year I won't have to even everything out, and I'll just say I'm going to put them all wherever I want. Let's say Well of Ascension, we'll toss that down here because, again, I think I said that I like the Hero of Ages more than that. This is where I'm struggling up here. I'll toss Dune. I love Dune. Again, I said that it was one of my favorite books that I had read, and it got me back into reading. But because it was a reread, and because I've seen the movies, and because I've watched a bunch of different content on the movies, I've watched YouTube videos talking about the lore of Arrakis, I'll put it down here and just make people upset, I guess. Well, anyway, here's my list for the year. I'm going to say that Dungeon Crawler Carl, one of the best books I read in terms of just being fun. It was just an awesome book. And we'll just count it through here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 books on the year. Looking forward for another great 2025. I love the books that I read this year. Wouldn't have changed anything out. And I've got an exciting TBR going forward. If you have any books you think that I should read, throw them down in the comments. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one. This is Matt is Reading. You can always follow me on Peloton at Matt is Sweaty.